Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Rachel and I'm an archaeologist. My channel is all about real-life archaeology, dispelling the myths around it and making it accessible to a wider base of people. Like many other archaeologists, one of the things that inspired me towards this career as a child was Indiana Jones. I have very fond memories of watching the films with my dad as a kid, and I'm very excited for the fifth installment, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, to come out at the end of June. Indiana Jones is undoubtedly one of, if not the most recognizable archaeologist in the world. And so in the lead up to the fifth film, I thought I would do a bit of a deep dive into the previous installments. Today's video covers Raiders of the Lost Ark and is part of a series I'm doing on each indie film. I will also be doing a review/reaction of the fifth film shortly after it comes out in theaters. Since I watched the films as a child, I didn't think that a reaction type video would be very genuine. So instead, today I'm going to be discussing the archaeological methods, sites, and artifacts portrayed in the movie. I know that there are probably a lot of people that are also curious about if these things are real or what they were inspired by, and how often do we see real archaeology in the films. Before we begin, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button so you can know right away when the next video comes out. Also, if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up to help me out with the algorithm so that more people can see it. Okay guys, let's dig in. I'm going to start with an interesting tidbit about the conception of Indiana Jones as a character that I found while researching for this video. If you ask any actual archaeologist, including myself, about him, they will probably talk about how he inspired them, but when they grew up, they realized that he's actually a garbage archaeologist. And something I don't think many people know is that he was actually never meant to be a good example of one. A while back, the transcript of an early story meeting between creators of Raiders surfaced on the internet. Screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan and Steven Spielberg meet with George Lucas, who originally conceived the story. Lucas describes his conception of the character as follows. He is an archaeologist and an anthropologist, a PhD. He's a doctor. He's a college professor. What happened is, he's also a sort of rough and tumble guy, but he got involved in going in and getting antiquities, so sort of searching out antiquities, and it became a very lucrative profession. So he, rather than be an archaeologist, he became a sort of outlaw archaeologist. He really started being a grave robber for hire, is what it really came down to. And the museums would hire him to steal things out of tombs and stuff. Essentially, he's a bounty hunter. Anything that's quasi-legal or amorphous, he'll do it. And so there you have it, folks. The irony that the character which inspired so many of us to go into heritage is actually probably the worst example we could ever have on purpose. Now I'm going to work my way through as if we're watching the movie from the beginning, starting with the opening section that's set somewhere in South America in 1936. Indiana starts the film using a map to find an artifact, which is good archaeology, but by the end of it, we find out that he is essentially stealing it from its native people to sell to a museum, which is bad archaeology. As opposed to his rival Balak, who knows the local language of Jovitos and is working with the native people of the area. This is actually a really great example of how ideally archaeology should be done, where you're engaging with the descendants of the people you are researching. It's a really interesting role reversal when you think about it. Is Balak meant to actually be the good guy? Luckily, the answer is no, because as we find out later, he ends up working for the Nazis. Moving away from ethics, what do we know about the golden idol that everyone wants, the places it's located in, and the culture it allegedly comes from? The idol is never directly named in the movie, and further expansion tie-in comics and books classify it as a Chachapoyan fertility idol. This artifact did not exist in antiquity. However, it is based on the green stone, not gold, Dumbarton Oak's birthing figure, which is presumed to depict an Aztec goddess. The Chachapoyans were a real historic native population known as the Warriors of the Clouds. They lived and farmed in the high altitudes of the Peruvian Andes. Sometime after 1450, the Inca moved in and consumed their society. Shortly after, the Spanish conquest began and the remnants of the Chachapoyan culture were lost. However, much archaeological evidence remains, and it is from these sources that we have learned the most about them. For example, their sculptural style was far different from that of the Golden Idol, and they did not build the elaborate trap systems portrayed in the film. However, they were accomplished builders of fortified cities, as sites like the Kulep Fortress, with its high, long walls and settlement of more than 400 buildings, shows. These structures were characteristically built on high slopes, unlike the movie where the temple is hidden in a heavily jungled lowland. Next, we're going to move on to Indy teaching a class about the Turk-Deen barrow and the pitfalls of folklore legends of a golden coffin, leading to people looting the site looking for it, which is a bit ironic given that he was just doing that a few scenes ago. Turkdene and Hazelton are both real places in England, and there are 2 Neolithic burial graves there. However, only one has been completely excavated, and this was done from 1979 to 1982, well after Indy theoretically taught his class. The legend of the gold coffin seems to have been made up for the film as well. In 2021, archaeologists and geneticists published the results from the examination of the bones and teeth of 35 people found buried in the barrow during these excavations in the 80s. They discovered that 27 were biological relatives from 5 continuous generations of a single extended family. Next, we have an interesting dialogue exchange between Indy and Marcus Brody from the museum, which mentions buying antiquities and the International Treaty for the Protection of Antiquities. The buying of antiquities is something that museums continue to do to this day. However, now they have much more strict protocols and laws around how these objects are acquired than they used to, and certainly would have in Indiana's time. There was no international treaty for the protection of antiquities in the 1930s. The closest thing we have to that is the UNESCO Convention on the Means of Prohibiting and Preventing the Illicit Import, Export, and Transfer of Ownership of Cultural Property, which was introduced in 1970. That said, many countries had enacted cultural heritage protection legislation in the 1930s, and some even as early as 1903. Now we go on to Indy being recruited by the US Army to find the Ark of the Covenant before the Nazis do. I want to touch on here about the Nazis and their role in this and how it played out in real life. Nazi archaeology really happened. Throughout the late 1930s and early 1940s, archaeology was used as a tool by the fascist state to reinforce their political and cultural beliefs. The Annenerbe, or Study Society for Primordial Intellectual History German Ancestral Heritage, was founded in 1935. Their goal was to research the cultural history of Hitler's master race, the Aryans. As they expanded their borders and influence, Hitler and this society pursued and retrieved numerous religious artifacts. The authenticity of the items collected and sought is debatable, but included the Spear of Destiny, the Holy Grail, and of course, the Ark. They also stole relics from the Holy Roman Empire regalia, including the Imperial Sword of St. Maurice and the Holy Lance. Several of these objects were rumored to have mythical powers, although clearly none of them worked the way that Hitler may have wanted if they were in fact authentic. The society sponsored numerous expeditions around the world trying to prove that the Nordic people had once ruled the world, and included journeys to Antarctica, the Middle East, Tibet, Ukraine, and Poland. Across Europe, Africa, and Western Asia, the Nazis looted thousands of priceless treasures from museums, churches, synagogues, homes, and private collectors. The theft was so expansive and culturally destructive that author Lynn H. Nichols referred to it as the rape of Europa. Most treasures were reunited with their owners after the war, but thousands of items still remain unclaimed or lost. These activities actually led to the creation of the Monuments Men, a division of the Allied Powers Army, which was focused on preventing the Nazis from taking more artwork or recovering it from them, and in fact could probably be considered one of the inspirations for the storyline in this movie. Moving on, Indy is told that the Nazis have found the city of Tanis, where the Ark is reputed to have been taken by the pharaoh Sheshonq after he looted Jerusalem in 980 BCE. Pharaoh Sheshonq is usually associated with Sheshonq I, founder of the 22nd dynasty of Egypt in the Third Intermediate Period. This dynasty was not comprised of native Egyptians. They were a series of Libyan chiefs. Sheshonq's association with the biblical Sheshonq is partly due to the fact that he reigned at the right time for this event and his similar sounding name. However, the reason most scholars think he was Sheshonq is because Sheshonq I left behind an explicit record of a military campaign where the names of captured towns are located primarily in the territory of the Kingdom of Israel. However, the inscription makes no mention of Jerusalem itself, and there are a few hypotheses as to why. Its name may have been erased, the list may have been copied from an older pharaoh's list of conquests, or the Judean king ransomed the city, which would have saved it from being listed. Tanis, the city where the Ark resides in the movie, is a real archaeological site and was the capital of the 22nd dynasty. Tanis is the Greek version of its name. The Egyptians would have called it Janat. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. The site is located on the Tanitic branch of the Nile Delta, nowhere near Cairo or the true desert as is shown in the film. Also, unlike in the film, it was never lost to a year-long sandstorm. It remained populated until its abandonment in the Roman times. The first large-scale archaeological excavations there were in the 1860s. In 1866, a copy of the Canopus Decree was discovered there, an inscription in both Greek and Egyptian hieroglyphs that, unlike the Rosetta Stone, included a full hieroglyphic text, thus allowing a direct comparison of the Greek text to the hieroglyphs and confirming the accuracy of Jean-François Champollion's approach to deciphering hieroglyphs. During the 20th century, the French carried out several excavations campaigns at Tanis. The burials of 3 pharaohs of the 21st and 22nd dynasties survived intact, safe from looters, and were discovered in 1939 and 1940. They contained a large catalog of gold, jewelry, lapis lazuli, and other precious stones, as well as funerary masks. While the portrayal of the location and history of Tanis is inaccurate, the depiction of the excavation on it is actually incredibly accurate and period authentic. The scenes with the carts and dozens of workmen in the desert are not dissimilar to the 1920s silent films from the site of Kish in Iraq. Here are a few clips from a video on the excavation by the Field Museum so you can see what I mean. Isn't that cool? They look just like the scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. I've put the link to the full video on the site below if you want to watch the entire thing. Now we come to the focus of the film and Indy's hero quest, the Ark of the Covenant. Honestly, I could probably do an entire video on this itself, but today I'll do my best to cover the basics. According to the book of Exodus, God instructed Moses to build the ark to house the stone tablets bearing the 10 Commandments. Moses was shown the pattern for building it and told that it would be made of acacia wood gilded in gold. The instructions and dimensions for building it are recorded in Exodus, which actually allowed the film to reproduce a pretty accurate version of what it might have looked like. The biblical ark did reportedly have magical powers, which assisted the Israelites in conquering Jericho, crossing the River Jordan, and causing the Philistines to be infested with tumors and mice when they captured it in battle and took it away. Eventually, it takes up residence in Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. King Hezekiah is the last biblical figure mentioned as having seen it. In a non-canonical text known as the Treatise of the Vessels, Hezekiah is identified as one of the kings who had the ark and other treasures of Solomon's temple hidden during a time of crisis. The ark eventually disappears from explicit mention in the Bible, which begs the question of what happened to it. There are several theories which I'm going to list here in no particular order. The first theory is the one that Raiders is based off of, that Sheshonq took the ark as a part of conquering Jerusalem. This is based on a line from the Book of Kings that reads, "In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Sheshonq, king of Egypt, attacked Jerusalem. He carried off the treasures of the temple of the Lord and the treasures of the royal palace. He took everything, including all the gold shields Solomon had made." Notably, this doesn't mention the ark, which is why we can't be sure that this is what happened. The second theory proposes that in 587 BCE, when the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem and Solomon's temple, they took the ark away. An ancient Greek version of the biblical book of Ezra suggests that the Babylonians took away the vessels of the ark of God, but does not mention taking away the ark itself. This theory is heavily debated. Some scholars think that it was taken to Babylon and then brought back. Others think that it was hidden somewhere on the Temple Mount. We cannot investigate this theory about it being on the Temple Mount as present because attempts to excavate there are met with protests by the Muslim authorities that control and currently manage it. Next, we have a reference from the second book of Maccabees written around 100 BCE that says the prophet Jeremiah was warned by God about the Babylonian invasion. And so he took the ark, the tabernacle, and the altar of incense and buried them in a cave, informing those of his followers who wished to find the place that it should remain unknown until the time that God should gather his people again together and receive them unto mercy. You may have already heard our next theory, which is by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. They claim that they possess the ark and it is kept under guard in a treasury near the Church of Our Lady Mary in Zion in the town of Axum. This theory comes from the Kebra Nagast, an Ethiopian epic from the 14th century. It narrates how the real ark was brought to Ethiopia by Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. with divine assistance while a forgery was left in Jerusalem. Edward Ollendorff, a former professor of Ethiopian studies at the University of London, says that he personally examined the Ark held within the church in Axum in 1941 while a British Army officer. According to him, it is an empty wooden box of middle to late medieval construction. In 2009, the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church of Ethiopia said he would announce to the world the next day the unveiling of the Ark. The following day, he announced that he would not unveil it after all, but that instead he could attest to its current status. Our next theory also comes from Africa, where the Lemba people of South Africa and Zimbabwe have claimed that their ancestors carried the Ark south and eventually hid it in a deep cave in the Dumge Mountains. Genetic Y-DNA analysis in the 2000s has established a partially Middle Eastern origin for a portion of the male Lemba population, but no specific Jewish connection. Our last theory is that the Ark was kept in the Basilica of St. John Lateran in Rome and survived pillages by Alaric and Gyseric, but was lost when the basilica burned down. Before I finish, I have to mention that in watching the whole film, I saw Dr. Jones using proper archaeological methods 3 times in the entire film. The first is using his map in the beginning. The second is when he uses his brush, notebook, and tape measure to help locate where the Ark is. And the third is when he uses a theodolite to find the Ark's location. Although I will mention that he is 100% not using it as it's meant to be used. It is a measuring tool. It is not a telescope. Okay, that's it for today, folks. What do you think happened to the Ark? Let me know in the comments down below. I really enjoyed watching Raiders. It's been a few years since I last did, but I also really enjoyed doing my research for this video and discovering all the different real-life elements in archaeology that the film drew on to make its narrative. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Next week, I will be covering the Temple of Doom, my second least favorite in the franchise and the one which gave me nightmares as a child. Subscribe and hit the bell button to get notified when it comes out. You can also find me on Instagram at rachelallman.digs, where I post lots of extra content that you don't necessarily see here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!